From the Daily Mail, Russia plans false flag attack on hydroelectric dam to flood Kherson in latest attack on energy plants as Ukraine brings in 4-hour blackouts to tackle electricity shortages. So that's bad. Now, what they're saying is General Sergei Surovikin, Russia's new supreme commander in Ukraine, has spoken to Russian media in recent days about what he called a devastating strike on the Nova Kakhovka dam, which he said was being plotted by Kiev's troops. Surovikin, who has also been preparing the Russian public for a retreat from the region, said the blast would flood Kherson and cause widespread damage. They go on to mention in the article that according to experts from the study of war, it's actually them prepping us to accept a false flag attack. Because what's really happening is they're saying, hey, look, they're going to attack us. Then they blow the dam, knocking out power in the region, retreating, and then blaming Ukraine for it. Who do you believe?
Yeah, that's... Go ahead. You wanted to say something before.
You know, I've studied Russia and the Soviet Union and now Russia for 30 some years, and they think half European and half Asian. I mean, and they're like you said, actually, it's in both camps. It's kind of like with China. I mean, they are sometimes Oriental in their thinking. In the end, for Putin, it's about his survival, his power base, and after that, what's better for his vision for Russia.
Yeah, I covered this story in my earlier video today on my channel, and it's the United States and U.S. intel saying Russia's going to launch a false flag attack to flood this. Russia is saying the same thing on their state television, and everything they're saying is almost the same exact thing, except you reverse the major actors here. They're saying the United States is going to be launching a false flag attempt, and we've seen this kind of rhetoric heat up, especially today, which is concerning to say the least. But anything could happen. I think we should always be skeptical, but when it comes to this larger war, we have to understand that there's also unconventional warfare. What happened to Nord Stream wasn't an accident, and I think we have to look at our infrastructure as it's also a potential target for the Russians or the Chinese or even third parties that could intervene and say, hey, it could be in our interest to spark up this conflict, make it a bigger conflict, and it might not even be Russia or the United States that could set up a false flag. It could be a third party, a country, or another special group that comes in there and it's like, okay, fight each other as we rise to power.
So obviously the concern is a humanitarian crisis. So we have the Dnieper River has cut off the Russian troops, of course, that are in the Kherson side of the west side of the river. The Ukrainians are poised. They've knocked out most of the bridges. The Russians are resupplying with pontoons and boats and what have you. That can't be sustained for long combat operations. So if there's Russian forces trapped, I think that dam is going down no matter what. What's surprising to me in my early days in the Army, the Soviets, the Russians, were far better at disinformation and information operations than they are today. Putin has two audiences, the international audience and of course his domestic. His domestic audience thinks he's fantastic. He's got 80-some% positives despite the bad news.
Does he really, though? How much can we trust of their media?
According to Trafalgar.
Yeah.
I do think he tends to be popular. I mean, he's the macho man. We have that image ingrained in our brains. In a T-shirt on the back of it.
He has high approval numbers because he turned Russia from an international joke to a place that, of course, made sure that people weren't drinking all the time. One of the biggest reasons why Putin is as popular as he is because he's not drunk all the time like the previous leader was.
Yeltsin.
Yeltsin, exactly. And then when you see him reprimand people who do get drunk, who are in the factories, who are in major institutions of power in Russia, he makes an example out of them. And even when there's occasions to have a drink or have a shot or have cheers, he's like, no, I'm not doing it. So that's, one reason why people see him as this kind of, savior to Russia and their interests and their country. But at the end of the day, it's just another politician.
And how long can he last with losses and casualties stacking up? Afghanistan, 8 years later on, 8 years of a war with Afghanistan, they finally withdrew in 1989. I mean,
but this is Russia's strategy, hasn't it always been? Just send ridiculous amounts of your troops until you just overwhelm your opponents?
That has been their approach since World War I.
Yeah,
human wave.
Not in Vietnam.
Yeah.
They were happy to fight the limited war by sending arms into Vietnam.
Yeah.
I think after World War II, they realized it's just not a tenable way to fight.
Proxy wars using allies against the United States, and then that flipped in the 80s when Reagan started using proxies in Latin America and elsewhere, and in Africa as well, and then in Afghanistan, where we finally realized we don't have to do all the fighting ourselves. The policeman of the world. Remember that? I mean, that notion from some years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Limited war. It was a Henry Kissinger doctrine that they kind of instituted.
Vladimir Putin is using this culture war rhetoric there's a lot of people who feel that in the West right now, we've got these degenerate, deviant, and just abhorrent ideologies emerging from the left. Vladimir Putin seems to be capitalizing that, outright calling out this stuff as Satanism. And so there are a lot of people, even in the U.S., who think he's actually this great Christian nation fighting back against evil and degeneracy.
Yeah, he's also speaking out against child conversion therapy.
Right. But is this him realizing there's an opportunity to propagandize, or does he actually believe the things he's saying?
Well, I mean, he has a problem on his hands, because I know he wants to identify that as traditionally Russia, but Russia today is becoming more and more increasingly Muslim than it is Christian or European.
True.
What is Russia today? I think it's hard to get our minds around, in America, but I think that's part of his land grab with, south of Abkhazia and Georgia, and now in eastern Ukraine. They're ethnic Russians, but something really went wrong. Since 2014, Vladimir Putin has managed to forge a Ukrainian identity, whether you're ethnic Ukrainian or ethnic Russian. They now identify fully as Ukrainian, most of them. There's always exceptions.
Yeah. I was there when the Maidan protests started. And so I was it was awesome. I mean, food was great. I saw the building that they set on fire. I got to see the statue that they'd pulled down of Lenin.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a long, complicated story into how that all went down. But I met a lot of these people, a lot of young people, and they all basically said the same thing. We remember what it was like under the Soviet Union, and we never want to go back. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people who talk about the Eastern region, and it's probably true for in the East. There's a lot of people who are ethnically Russian, they speak Russian and view themselves as more Russian, but then you're going to end up with a split in the country from people who are like, I remember the Soviets, we're not happy with that. And then there are going to be a lot of people who are just like, I don't trust the West, I don't like their ideology.
You remember, and that's interesting because their grandparents lived through the Holodomor, however you say it, the forced starvation by Stalin. Yeah, that's it. In 32, 33 over the winter, and 7 to 10 million. We don't even know how many died, Ukrainians, and happened in other countries. I mean, it's a tough situation, and Putin is stuck now. He didn't have his decisive knockout blow. He did not get Zelensky. He did not take Kyiv, and now he's stuck in his fight.
I'm just surprised. I mean, there are a lot of people who firmly believe Putin is winning. I think that's just not true. I know there's propaganda, and it really annoys me. Like, you pull up American social media, and every single video is like some Ukrainian soldier flicking a cigar, being like, ha ha ha, and I'm like, come on. Like, I know they're not winning every single fight, but you look at where the major news is breaking, where the major moves are happening, and what Putin's doing, and they're getting pushed out. But there's a lot of people who just, I suppose they don't want to believe it. They want to believe that Russia is winning, he's advancing, Ukraine is not winning. My thought on this is just, did Putin not realize that NATO was going to be a proxy war with NATO? I mean, you have Russian pundits saying since the beginning of this, I think like in March, they're like, we're at war with NATO. Okay, did he think he was going to win that? We're providing intelligence, we're providing weapons, training. Not only that, our citizens, volunteers. And now we're learning from The Intercept actual U.S. special operations on the ground in Ukraine. Why would Putin think he's going to go up against NATO and win? Is it a last stand, or what is it?
Yeah, I think he underestimated the resolve of the Ukrainians, which I did too as well. I'm surprised that they were able to beat back the airborne forces, and then overestimated his own forces. On paper, good army, pretty modernized, the frontline forces, but look what happened. I mean, but this also betrays a point here. We have to, and Pennsylvania plays a role in this. I mean, energy.
Yeah.
So we're in this energy crisis here. We're told gas prices are going up because of Putin. That's Biden's line. But Pennsylvania has the resources to become a leader in energy in the world with our natural gas. We have one of the largest natural gas deposits around the globe. We have great high-quality coal. We have high-quality oil. So my goal as governor, of course, is to make us number one in energy production. There's $100 billion of potential wealth out there to be received by Pennsylvania if we could produce that much. It's all about the capability. My goal is to have a pipeline to Philly, out to Delaware, so we can start exporting to Boston, because Boston had to bring in Russian ships in 2018 in that cold winter. You remember the madness because of there's no pipelines from Pennsylvania, so they brought in 2 ships from Siberia 4,000 miles away. So I want to be able to support Boston, but maybe export also to Germany, get them off of Russian oil and gas, and maybe our friends in Poland, and for sure the Lithuanians have already committed that they wanted to buy it off of Pennsylvania.
I was willing to entertain a lot of this go green stuff for a while. But the moment you come out and say, Joe Biden says he wants to get us off fossil fuels. He says it was part of his campaign when he ran for president. Then he shuts down Keystone. Then he bans fracking in certain areas. And then he goes to Saudi Arabia and begs for oil.
Yes.
I'm like, it's not about stopping fossil fuels. I don't know what the actual, actually, let me just ask you, how does this make sense? That we got to stop using fossil fuels, and then he hurts the United States, and then goes over to Saudi Arabia and begs them to keep up production so we can keep getting fossil fuels. What's the reasoning?
That when we were energy independent and gas was under $2 a gallon.
184.
184, just less than 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago. And now we're begging the Saudis and even go to the Venezuelans and kind of winking and nodding to the Iranians. Are you kidding me? And exporting our wealth over to these foreign countries who aren't really that friendly. I mean, we have a good relation with the Saudis because of necessity, because who's around them, and it's a rough neighborhood. But United States ought to be energy independent, and that's one thing. This is the age of governors. I'm glad you've brought other candidates on the show here. Pennsylvania could lead the way in making America energy independent once again.
Why do you think it is that they're advocating for no energy independence at home while begging others for energy? I mean, do we just not understand, or is it just... I wonder if it's that Democrats know their base wants environmentalism, but they also know you can't have cheap gas and environmentalism, so they're just lying.
I think it's exactly that. I think they're driven by a gross ideology here that's making life harder and more expensive than the working class people the Democrats claim they represent.
Hey, yeah.
Let me jump to this story real quick. We're after the Daily Wire.
But just really quick before doing that, they got to build back better somehow. What better way than to destroy the previous version of it? And I really wanted to ask you a question, Doug, because the Biden administration has specifically stopped domestic energy exploration and production. Will they stand in your way as governor, and can they stop you from doing what you want to do?
In state, that's my alleyway. On state lands, I completely control that. On private lands, with the cooperation of landowners, I don't know if we have time. I got a 4-prong approach. It's called the Pennsylvania Energy Independence Act. It's not a gimmick. It's actually, I developed this with the energy sector, and of course, we want to do it responsibly. We want to do it cleanly. We don't want our trout being killed and poisoning our land. Obviously, we don't want cancer-causing agents, and the energy sector has proven they can do it, better. The first part, of course, is rolling back our entry into this regional greenhouse gas initiative, RGGI, which is it's a carbon tax. It's doubled almost our cost of energy in Pennsylvania starting the 1st of June. So on day one, we're going to be out of it when I'm sworn in on 17 January, and you'll see immediate relief for the working class people out there, savings in energy. So it's not a choice between heating and eating. Part 2 of that, of course, is rolling back about 8 years of regulations from our Department of Environmental Protection within Pennsylvania that have gone too far, because it's so restrictive that they're driving energy or businesses to Ohio, West Virginia, and Texas, and I want them back in Pennsylvania. And then, of course, I talked about the pipeline, one coming across from Pittsburgh area to Philly, and I'll bring lots of great jobs. I'll bring security as far as energy goes. It'll improve it for NATO. And then also I'd like to see a pipeline towards Lake Erie. And so, and then, of course, I'll open up state lands. And doing that, I can do all that without being stopped by the EPA.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.